I'd like to call forward Kelly Carter now. He's going to be speaking today. We're really looking forward to this. Just a very brief introduction. There's a couple of interesting things about him. One that he'll be speaking about, which is he used to pastor in Victoria. He went away for a while, and he's back again. Could you fill us in on the details with that? Just how long were you here before? How long were you away, and when did you come back?
It's all part of what I'm going to do.
Okay. There's a other thing I learned about Kelly, getting to know him. He's studied a lot, systematic theology, I believe. Is it a doctorate? Yeah. And he's at Shelburne Street Church. So just really glad you're here, Kelly. Could I offer a prayer for you before we?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You turn those over. Nobody got it. Knows about advance.
Yeah, Lord, we thank you for our brother Kelly and for the word you've given him today. We pray you'd bless us through what he shares. In Jesus' name, amen.
Great to see you all. I've got a manuscript. I'm just going to read from this. Graham said about 30 minutes, and I thought the only way for me to do 30 minutes is just have a manuscript, read every word, and then I'll make sure I'm 30 minutes, okay? Just to put me somewhere on your Victoria ecclesiastical history map, I came to serve the Shelburne Street Church as their full-time senior minister when I was 27 years old in September 1986, coming up to 39 years ago.
Yeah.
I came from the United States, having grown up in Oregon, so was used to the rain. Having become a Christian there, completely out of the world, having eventually gone to school in Texas, trained for ministry, and having been in Los Angeles for 4.5 years as a youth minister. Somebody asked me earlier, knowing somebody who knew that, said, so what about your relationship with the fires and people down there and all that? And it's horrible. I know many, many, many people in the Los Angeles area, church members and things, who are in just incredibly dire straits. It's horrible what is happening there. So our prayers need to be with those people for sure. Those times in Los Angeles were very interesting. I once had a teen come to a class on a Wednesday night, a friend of a regular member, and he was stitched from nose to ear because he'd just been in a knife fight the day before. I had a kid from my youth group that was walking down the sidewalk in Long Beach, California, who was with another kid, and the other kid happened to have the wrong color of jacket on. And so as he was just walking down the sidewalk, a car pulled up, and it was a typical, cliche drive-by shooting. And they shot him and killed this kid on the sidewalk because he had the wrong color of jacket on. And that kind of thing happened in our church. We had two people that were murdered in our congregation while I was there, two completely separate incidents, a young woman who was beat to death by her boyfriend, and an older gentleman who was killed while he was walking home with the grocery that he had just purchased at the grocery store. He was like in his 70s or so, walking home. That kind of thing just happened. I was at Christmas Eve with the co-minister in his house, and I looked, and there were police in the backyard taking down a suspect who just robbed a fast food restaurant. So life in LA was interesting. And so we were grateful when we had an opportunity to do something different than that. And that opportunity came, when I, growing up in Oregon, I was excited when I heard that there was a church in Victoria, British Columbia, who, climate-wise and all of that fit. And my wife and I just thought, we could do something with this, So I called the church up here. Some of you know the name Steve Mann from Don Excavating. Steve talked to me on the phone and said, why don't you come up and, we'll see what can happen here. And the rest is kind of history in many ways. We were on the way here, in fact, I was only 27. I've been in ministry for 4.5 years, had worked on a master's degree, but hadn't completed that yet. And I was on the way here, and we stopped in San Jose. I was on the plane, stopped in San Jose for just a quick layover, and there were two ladies right behind me, and the seats behind me, and they'd been talking about how they'd been guessing people's age and how they just always were making mistakes. You're always guessing, and you're saying that they're older than they really are. And so they said, the one thing we have to do we have to make sure that we're always conservative when we guess. We're going to guess way younger than what we think these people actually are. And so I stood up out of my seat while we were in this layover in San Jose, and I turned around and I said, so how old, ladies? I've been listening to your conversation. How old do you think I am? I was 27. They said 35. That was their conservative guess, trying to make sure that they guessed too old. They guessed 35. So I think it had something to do with my hair loss, but I'm not completely sure. But when I came here, I thought the reason I got this job is because they think I'm 10 years older than I actually am. Okay, so that's why I got hired. I ended up doing 15 wonderful years here in Victoria. It was absolutely fantastic. I remember joining and being a part of this group back then, which was, in fact, it was just fantastic. In fact, Neil, I sat next to him and he said, I remember you. He said, I remember that you were the head of this for a couple of years, weren't you? And I said, yeah, I actually was. Around 1999, 2000 or so, I was the head of this. The Evangelical Pastors Fellowship is what we called it back then. And I was the head of all of that. Some of you might remember, and Neil mentioned this to me as well, I coached baseball. And so if you ever, you might remember from back then, I took a team to the Little League World Series in 1999. And then we took some other teams to nationals and stuff. And it was really cool. The Saanich News would interview me, and here's this pastor talking about being involved in the community and all that. It was really, something that was really fantastic. So I remember when Graham came and started working with YWAM, and I remember, this is true, sitting next to Dennis Scott in a meeting just like this, and Graham's there and started talking and introducing himself. And Dennis Scott, I said to him, who's that young guy? And Dennis Scott said something like, and I can't do a British accent, okay, but he said something like, I don't know, but he's got some kind of accent. Which I thought was really interesting. Les Biggs was here back then, especially in the beginning. I remember Les, he and I were good friends. Gary Bennett was a great friend of mine. Ron Nachowski used to come to these meetings. Christopher Page, who was the rector at St. Philip's Anglican Church, used to come in the early days. Doug Patstone used to come and was part of this. John Stone was always there as part of these groups. Don Allen would always come from Trinity back in those days. Gareth Evans was always around there. Neil was there. There's just, and probably others I'm forgetting. And those were great days. And so you recently did a thing where you kind of chronicled what we had done over the years in the city of Victoria. And I remember very well the Commonwealth Games. I remember very well Celebration of Hope. I remember Michael Green coming over from Region, he was a professor of mine, coming over and holding a huge meeting. Just a wonderful time to be in ministry and doing things in Victoria. We had a great time here. Rob Fitterer and I had the chance to start Community Christian College back in those days. Used to meet at Pacific Christian School in the evenings and teach classes, and it was fantastic. And because I loved all of that so much, and especially the whole teaching aspect of all of that, I decided in 2001 to leave Victoria and to go work on a PhD somewhere. In the meantime, I had done an MDiv at Regent. Had a wonderful time there, fantastic time at Regent College. Enjoyed like all those guys. Packer was there then, and Fee was there, and Ward Gask was there, and a whole bunch of people, and it was wonderful. I would ride the ferry over. You guys, you probably some of you have done just exactly this. I'd get up on my day off. It was a day off that I'd take my day off from the church, and I would go and get on the ferry really early, or maybe the night before. Go over, sometimes sleep on a preacher's couch in Vancouver. Or I just go really early in the morning, got to know the Vancouver bus system really well. Take the 41 bus out to the campus at UBC and go to Regent. And I take those classes where you can go for one, get the whole class in one day a week. And just a fantastic experience. And I loved all of that. And now, after all of that, I get to come back and to be back in Victoria. And, we had, in the meantime, my wife and I, after we went to Dallas, Texas, and I worked on a PhD at Southern Methodist University, finished up with all of that, thought, what are we going to do? And just about that time, there was a Church of Christ in Calgary that called us and said, hey, are you coming back to Canada? Is that your plan? Which always was the plan, that we would come back to Canada. And we had a chance to go to Calgary, and I was in Calgary for 17 years. Had a chance to talk to Craig a bit about that yesterday on the phone as well, just different people that we know from Calgary and Vision Ministries and stuff. Wonderful ministry, wonderful time, Church of 300. They treated me so well. It was just fantastic. But there came a time and an opportunity to come back here and to do some things maybe that were needed at Shelburne Street. And so we're back after 22 years. So a prodigal comes home. And I don't know, how do I work this?
Just click the slide you want up there on the computer.
Click it like with a... There's no click. Okay, and I just push it right, and it'll go through it. Perfect. Take somebody with a PhD and give them a computer, they don't know what to do with it. Okay, so a prodigal comes home. And so the definition of prodigal, definition number one is one who spends or gives lavishly and foolishly, okay? Probably fits, okay? That probably fits me. There have been times when that is me, I'm sure. Not that I ever had anything to spend, but I probably did so foolishly in whatever I had. But number two definitely fits. One who has returned after an absence, okay? So I was gone. I was absent for a while, and I've come back. And what I want to talk about today are some things that I learned while I was gone. And there is a sense in which this was a bit of a sojourn for Robin and for me. And that's because Victoria, for us, coming here at 27, our oldest child was 3.5 when we moved here. And then we had another child, and then we had another child. And so we really started raising our family here. And our oldest son graduated from Mount Doug High. And our middle child was at PCS at that point when we moved. So in so many ways, Victoria has always been home. And in fact, the Shelburne Street Church has been like a home church for us. Even though I was raised in Oregon, I came out of the world. I was converted to Christ when I was 14 years old. Didn't have a strong background in the church or anything like that. But when I came to Shelburne Street and was part of the church here, it really did become home for us, and it became family. And that never has gone away. Like the whole time that we were in Calgary, I can't tell you the number of times that my wife would look at me and say, this is wonderful. Calgary's a beautiful place, which of course it is. And she would say, but I think I want to retire in Victoria. And I didn't know if that would ever happen. We didn't know if we'd ever be back here or not. And then it's interesting, of course, you come back after all this time, and I was 27 then when I started. Now I'm 66, and people in Calgary are saying, well, I guess you're going out to the island to retire. And I'm thinking, hardly. Like, not at all. Like, my thoughts about coming to the island have nothing to do with retirement. I know it's going to happen at some point, but I really am not interested in that so much. I'm interested in coming and working with the church and doing the things that God wants me to do here. So we're back. And the things that I'm going to say here today may sound a bit trite, or in some ways, in fact, really obvious and simplistic. But I'm hoping the way, sometimes you can hear something really simple and you think to yourself, that is simple, but so profound. I don't know if this is going to be so profound, but I'm hoping that some of those things will resonate with you, even though these are very simplistic. And I think at times you're going to go, well, why'd we have him speak? He's just talking about stuff we already know. That's true. But maybe at the beginning of a year, it will be good for us to be reminded of some things that I think are really central and crucial. So here we go. First, our faith is decidedly defensible. And that might seem like a strange thing to say to a bunch of evangelical colleagues in ministry. Like, you could easily say to me, well, of course it is. Why would you feel the need to affirm this? What's the matter with your faith anyway? Is it weak or something? You feel like you have to affirm your faith? But when I left Victoria in 2001, having finished several years before this MDiv at Regent, I was wanting to work in an area of Bible and theology at a high level, and not just so I could increase my understanding of biblical and systematic theology or to be qualified to teach somewhere, but so that I could test and affirm the Christian faith, and in the process, also test and affirm my own personal faith. And it wasn't because I was going through a faith crisis or something like that. It's because, just like so many of you, I'm sure, you read and you hear and you know of the challenges. And even if you don't think to yourself, wow, I'm about ready to cave here on my faith, you're not there. But at the same time, you think, man, would I love to understand better this whole notion of who God is and how he wants me to think of him. And how do I interact with my own culture, which is so, in many ways, anti-God? How do I respond to that? And how do I respond to that in a way that is significant? Sometimes I think that evangelicals have suffered a little bit from what we might call easy believism. Or maybe our answers are a little bit too pat. Maybe there needs to be something a bit more robust when it comes to how we think of our faith. And I'm not talking just about, well, we need to do more profound apologetics. That's not so much it. It's more like just how do we think of what it means to be a faithful person before God? And what do we do with all the questions that the people in the world have for us? Not so much the questions that say, I don't believe there's a God, but the questions that would say something like, why is there suffering and there is a God? Why is it that the world's the way it is and there's a God? Those are good questions. And not just proving God's existence or something in an apologetic kind of way, but just helping us discern at a deeper level about who God is. So when I left, I intentionally chose an institution that was theologically quite liberal. Like I went to Southern Methodist University, which among schools that offer PhDs in the States anyway, you'd have the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons and the University of Chicago's and places like that. And then you would have the Southern Methodist University and Marquette University and Emory University, which you might say is kind of the second tiers. I didn't get into the first tier. I applied to some places, didn't get in, but I did get into to SMU. And so I went there intentionally to ask some questions and to learn from people that I knew were not where I was theologically. I wanted to hear what they had to say. And so most of the PhDs that I studied under had PhDs from Yale. These were not conservative evangelical type people. They'd studied under George Lindbeck and Hans Frey. They were very well at Wittgenstein and philosophical modernism, postmodernism. The only one on the faculty who was not kind of like that is William Abraham. Some of you might have read something from William Abraham, one of my professors. He'd gone to Oxford, did a degree in philosophy of religion, and also went to Asbury. So he was fairly evangelical in his own faith. But most of the guys I studied under were extremely liberal. And so I went and I was reading Bultmann, and I was reading John Hicks and Norman Perrins, John Dominic Crossan, Marcus Borg, Schubert Ogden, all these people who were not at all conservative in their perspective. And then, of course, I was hearing from people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Bart Ehrman and all those people who are constantly challenging our faith. And I loved it. Oh, I loved it. Like, it was not me sitting there going, I don't want to read all these people who are, almost antichrist. I loved it because I had a chance to hear what people out there think of our faith. And then to wrestle with that myself and ask real questions about where I stood and who I was and what I thought and why I believed what I believed. And I'll tell you, the things that I came out of there with were exactly why I went there. Like, I came out of there with, instead of a weakened faith, I came away with a faith that was actually extremely strong, extremely orthodox, and in fact, stronger when I came out because I now had the kind of intellectual background that allowed me to stand where I was standing in a way that I had never stood before. And so one of the things I want to say to anybody who has any questions about that, and if you think to yourself, man, I'd really like to go and do that myself, I got those same kind of questions. I'd love to talk to you about that. But the first thing I think it's really important to understand before we ever go there is that our faith is really, really defensible. It is decidedly defensible. We just don't have to worry about whether or not God exists or Jesus is who we say it is, or is the Bible inspired? Those kinds of questions. Those don't bother me. And I went to, an extremely liberal school. Second kind of point, and I went too far. Although the United States is also becoming more secularized, there is a drastic difference between Canada and the U.S. Now, again, you think, duh, of course. Have you looked at the paper lately? Don't you realize that we're about to become the 51st state?
Why did
But I'll tell you, one of the things that I discovered when I was down there, and of course I went to Texas, right? And I have a son now who lives in Dallas and a son who now lives in Little Rock, Arkansas. And those people are way, way behind us when it comes to the secularization of the culture. Way behind us. And of course, we all know that there's some massive differences, obviously political differences in a huge scale. And we won't get into all of that. But in terms of secularity, we're way, way ahead of them. They are so much more Christianized than we are. It's incredible. My wife and I adopted a little girl from Zambia. Our third child is a girl from Zambia that we adopted in 2003. Or sorry, 1993. Sorry. And so she then was kind of growing up here. And being a black child, we took her down to Texas. And I have to tell you, we were frightened by that. We're going to take her down into a culture that we think is racially prejudiced. And so I walked into her elementary school and we did a tour around and all of that. And then as we were leaving, this was the emotional, concerned father. I went over to the lady who's behind the counter in the church office or in the school office. And I said, can I just ask a question? Do you know if there's any black children in the class that she's going to be in? And the lady looked at me and she said, well, sir, her teacher's black. And I was blown away. And what I found was that not just was that kind of thing so present, but probably half the teachers in that public school were evangelical Christians. They all go to church. And they're serious about it. They have a genuine faith. And so that kind of thing struck us so much, just the huge difference between being in Canada for 15 years, doing ministry in what we considered a purely secular place, and then all of a sudden find ourselves down there. And so we do face this kind of crisis in the church regarding the numbers of full-time workers, for example. I think you guys might note that, a crisis in terms of full-time workers. And I think that's very telling about the secularization of our culture. Because what's happening is this, and maybe you'll disagree with this, but I think this is true. Parents in our culture right now who are Christians are not wanting their children to go into full-time ministry. And the reason they don't is because of, I think, the secularization of the culture and the secularization of the church. Just try and find a full-time staff member for your church. It is not an easy thing to do right now. I did some study in looking at seminaries and graduate schools and who's being trained for ministry. The numbers are not good. There are schools all over the place that are having to close or reduce their faculties because of the size of those institutions and the number of students that are coming. Why is that happening? Well, it's because of the secularization of the culture. And even in the church, we have parents who are influenced enough by that they would say, I really don't want my son or my daughter going into full-time ministry. They're not going to have a pleasant experience doing that. And they probably aren't going to make the kind of money that it would be really nice if they could make. And they're not going to have the kind of experience in life, just living out their career the way that we really would like them to have. And so my sense is that is a direct impact over secularization in Canada. And if that's the case, we are way ahead of the United States in terms of seeing that problem continue to be perpetuated in the church. And we're going to have to think a lot about that. And so over a 16-year period of teaching as an adjunct lecturer at Alberta Bible College and Ambrose University in Calgary, I watched the slow downward slide of the quality of student I had in my classes. Often, unfortunately, the very best were elsewhere. And we literally had the students at Alberta Bible College at different points who could not make it into other post-secondary institutions. They went to Bible college because there wasn't anything else they could do. And I found that incredibly disheartening. I get the notion of every member ministry, lay ministry, the incredible value of volunteers. I encourage all that. It's crucial, especially in today's church. It's biblical. My thoughts are not coming from a concern for creating more clergy. My concern is that the church still needs leaders who are trained in exegesis and in history and theology and church leadership and practical ministry. And currently, there is a lack of able, trained leaders and a lack of those who desire to be trained and to lead. And that's going to take us into a place that's not very healthy, is my concern. Now, I also learned in the midst of sensing the difference between the United States and Canadian cultures just how much you had all grown on me. I feel much, much more like a Canadian than an American, especially politically and with respect to the role faith plays in interacting with culture. I've lived in Canada for 33 years of my adult life, and I am so glad to be a Canadian and not just an American who plays at being a Canadian. I'm grateful for that. And part of that is the relationship that I've had with people in this room and, over a long period of years. Third thing, the wonderfulness of living in Victoria can make the loving of the world and the things of the world far too easy. There was a time when Robin and I visited here from Calgary about 14 or 15 years ago, and we took a drive along Dallas Road. We went out on Clover Point, and this was before they ruined it. Okay. And we parked and we looked across at the Olympic Mountains in Washington State, and my eyes filled with tears. And I looked at Robin and I said, "Do you realize that we lived here for 15 years? What a place!" And I was living in Calgary. Like, have you been to Calgary? No. Like, if you look to the west from Calgary, you'll see Banff and Lake Louise. Yeah. It's an unbelievable place. But we have the privilege of living here. And you do too. But because it's so wonderful here, it's easy to get distracted. I like salmon fishing. I like hunting. Okay? I have a bunch of guns. I'm an American. And I've lived in Texas twice. There isn't snow on the ground for 6 or 7 months here a year. Have you noticed that? I like having a nice yard where it seems every kind of flower is going to grow. And any and all of these things and many more can easily eat up our time, our energy, and our imaginations. We still need to keep in mind that despite the positive things that I see in N.T. Wright's eschatology, this world is not our home. There may be a new world coming instead of us floating around on clouds somewhere in the future. So we're just passing through on the way to a new heaven and a new earth. I think that's very possible. The Lord wants us to let everyone know this, that we're just passing through. And we can't do so if we love too much this beautiful place in which we live that is so easy to love. And that probably resonates with everybody in the room. Like, you probably all get that. It is just so easy to be distracted by the fact that we live in one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I just think we need to think about that too. Point 4. Personal spiritual growth by those in pastoral ministry should be a priority, particularly with respect to an application of the spiritual disciplines, and B, the development of those elements constituting holy spiritual fruit. Now, what I'm just giving you again are the things that I feel like I learned while I was gone. Did I not know this before? Well, of course, in some sense I did. But after studying pretty profound systematic theology for a number of years and reading a lot of deep folks, thinking an awful lot about church ministry and ministering, with a church of 300 for 17 years, there are some things that ministry still comes down to. And these are pretty simple. Nobody has to be told this in this room, in one sense. But this is profound, brothers and sisters. And one of the reasons this is crucial is not just because you need it, but our churches need it in you. They need to see it in you. And unfortunately, authenticity in our world is on such short supply. And young people today, perhaps more than anything, want to see authenticity in those who make pretensions to lead and instruct. And they're tired of hearing of all the failures and inconsistencies and misdirected priorities and excuses of those who profess to be leading and setting for them a direction. And when our own spiritual growth and our own carrying out of spiritual fruit are not present, they can't help but feeling like they are following blind guides. Sound familiar? And so we need to example for our flocks authentic spirituality if we're to make inroads against the kind of secularity that is present even in the church. And given that our culture is at present so challenging to faith and to the church, we as leaders will likely barely survive, if at all, unless the kind of spiritual strength is present in us that only develops while we live out a contemplative lifestyle and authentic relationship with Christ. Like, we can't possibly give them what we don't have ourselves. And they will look for it. And if we don't have it, they will know that we're blind guides. They will get our artificiality instead of our authenticity if that isn't part of our lives. So here we are starting out a new year together as pastors. I hope, I pray that at least some of us said to ourselves, I'm going to renew my Bible study again. And I'm going to pray this year in a new way like I haven't prayed in years. And I'm going to give myself to service and ministry in a way that I haven't before. It's a new year. We can start this out together. Like, I just think it's so crucial that this is authentically within us. And our churches will sense it immediately if it's not. But even worse, it's bad that they would sense that. What's even worse is that they can't receive from us what they need to receive if that's not there.
That's right.
They really need it. Fifth, I've only got 5, so we're almost done. Discipling others and nurturing in them mature, reproducing faith is the most important thing that we will do. And you might think, it took you 22 years and a PhD to figure that out. Well, no, it didn't. I think I knew that before. But this has been affirmed. I look at this now and think this is still true. And it is still true that this is the case, that this is right at the core of what it is that we're supposed to be doing. And so the Great Commission is actually the greatest commission. I love scholarship. I love biblical knowledge and theology. I love intelligent civil discussion about doctrine. I love practicing and understanding church leadership. I love large gatherings of Christians and community-wide events. I'm looking forward to what we're going to do on Good Friday. But the greatest commission verses from Matthew 28 are pretty clear about the priority of Jesus. And our world needs this more at any time, more than any other time. Right now, I think. I've been in ministry now for 43 years. I cannot think of a time in my ministry years when the Great Commission was called for any more than now. It is just so crucial. And one of the things I have felt in returning to Victoria is that living here is as wonderful as ever, but there are more hurting and searching people than when I was here before. I really think that's the case. We didn't have what was going on in front of Central Baptist Church when I was here before. I wasn't here. And I'm not saying that people didn't hurt before. Of course they did. I met many of them. We experienced all of that together. Those hurting people, but there are more now. And these hurting, searching people are oftentimes open to what it is that we have to share. So I think it's very true that as a whole, our culture has become more secular, but that the kind and level of secularization is not about to meet the needs of people who were made to be in relationship with the Creator. It just is not going to meet their needs. Are they more secular? Yes. Are they fulfilled in their secularity? Not even close. No, they aren't. And that gives us then an opening. It gives us an opening. And so we look, like I told a sad tale a moment ago about we can't get anybody to train for full-time ministry anymore because everybody's so secular, even in the church. That's a sad tale. But the good news is that we have the answer that the world needs. Like, we really do. Jesus is the answer that the world needs. And we need to supply the world with this Jesus who wants to transform everything. And then I would say, especially this is the case, that we can do this if we see the value of what has become known in missionality as missionality. This is something that I didn't know when I left here 22 years ago. In the meantime, I learned about missional churches, missionality. That was just becoming a thing, I think, as I left. Missionality is crucial. And so if you haven't done any reading in Darrell Guter or in George Hunsberger or in Alan Roxborough, and by the way, is it not true, folks? Somebody's going to remember this. Didn't Alan's brother Dennis come here for a while? Wasn't he in Victoria? I'm 100% certain that Alan Roxburgh's brother Dennis, I think it's Dennis, was here and came for a couple of years and did ministry in Victoria. Because I remember him speaking to this group. So,
Cam, his brother Cam.
oh, was it Cam? Sorry, I said, maybe I'm not right about Dennis.
Pastor in Greater Vancouver for career.
I don't want to say still Dennis. Maybe you may well be right. It's also possible that there is another brother. I'm not sure. Dennis was in my mind. Anyway, what's that?
Paul.
Oh, was it Bob? Yeah. Okay, yeah, okay.
He was at New Hope for ages.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, there you go. And that's Alan's brother. Uncle? Okay. I'm messing up the relationships, okay? And the names and everything else. Anyway, I don't think there's anybody like that ever lived here. Anyway.
It's Bob.
Okay. I apologize for not remembering that. I'm clearly not perfect. I knew I wasn't before I left.
0.6.
Yeah. So anyway, these guys, we need to read them. Okay, that's the point. We need to do some reading in this area. And so there's a little tickler there that, I think this is a place to go for us to learn an awful lot about how ministry needs to be set up and some priorities that we need to construct for ourselves. Okay, so I'm done. What I would love for you to do, they asked me, they said, could you do something to have some conversation take place afterwards? So there are some papers that have been passed out. I put the 5 points that I just made on that paper, and then I just asked 2 questions at the end. Okay? You can see what those questions are, and I'd love for you to spend a few moments on that before we finish here today.